Welcome to Storyfull Conversations, the podcast by Storyfull Matchmaking. I'm your host, Jenny Agan, matchmaker, educator, relationship coach, here to help soulful singles find meaningful connection. Each episode, we explore how people are reimagining modern dating, communication, and community because love should feel soul nourishing and not just surface level. Today, we're looking at connection through a communication and nonverbal lens. My guest is Dr. Elena Svetieva, a professor of communication at UCCS, who has a passion for authenticity, emotional expression, and how we communicate far beyond our words. She earned her PhD in communication from the University at Buffalo and completed her undergraduate degree in psychology and film studies at the University of Sydney. And while we won't go deep into film today, I think it does make a kind of quiet sense that film teaches you to read faces and pacing and emotional nuance. And Elena brings that same attunement into real-world conversations. The micro expressions, the shifts in tone, and subtle cues that signal safety, interest, tension, or connection. So in this episode, we explore how authenticity and deception show up in the body, why some people feel safe and others don't, what happens when nervous systems, or what happens between nervous systems during conversation, and how those nonverbal cues can shape dating, trust, and connection. Your adventure in love and life starts here. Let's tell a better story. So Elena Svetieva, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so delighted to be here. Yeah.
Yay. Okay. So a quick question. How did you become interested in communication, specifically deception, nonverbal cues, and authenticity?
Isn't the cliche like you become interested in the thing that you're bad at, right? Um, I was always fascinated by people, by deception, mostly because I'm really bad at it. Like, it's just not my thing. Like, I've always struggled to lie, even when it would serve me well, even when the moment calls for it. And I was like, why do we do this thing? And how is it that, I can tell when people are lying, or like just because I just felt so kind of oblivious to that whole world. So I think for me, that interest was very much like, oh, let me study this thing that I'm bad at, in both spotting it in other people and, doing it myself. And also, I have to say, I was inspired in my third year of my psychology degree. I had a lecturer who I just loved. His name was Michael Walker. He sadly passed away many years ago, but just the way he was able to kind of like break down human communication into its components and that kind of granular level analysis, I just thought was so fascinating. I still remember, and this is relevant also to dating, one of his early lectures where he was talking to us about how on a date somebody signals that they're receptive to a kiss, and like breaking it down right into like the movements of the head and like the eye, where the eyes flow. And I thought, this is just great. This is too much fun. And so, yeah, I fell in love with it that year. And that's why I decided to do my PhD in communication and deception. But yeah, that's the long and the short of it, of how I became interested.
I love that. And I think that it speaks to a lot of people's experiences that we're not necessarily taught these skills early on. And so it's really important to find ways how to learn to show up better in dating. And this is a fantastic way that you can do that, to learn those skills. Um, and I'm very interested about the idea of like how you can tell whether somebody can be ready for a kiss. Like, what are those specific signals that would be very interesting to hear about? Did you use them in your personal life when you were, engaging in that action with your
Oh, but
significant other?
the best part about like that study, I mean, it was a study by a guy called Kendon. It was done in the 70s. I don't think much has changed probably since the 1970s when it comes to like nonverbal communication and dating. But my favorite, like one of the funniest parts about that study is that it was really, he was studying heterosexual couples, and it was really the female's behavior that was like
Oh,
basically regulating the kissing, right? And it was And so it was very much like in heterosexual couples, usually like the woman is kind of giving a signal, looking towards the man, not like looking away, looking at the lips, that sort of thing. And it was like, oh, okay.
That's how folks
So,
know. Interesting.
guys who are good at this can actually spot receptivity by somebody's nonverbals, and they can probably avoid a really awkward interaction. And I thought that it would be smart to learn how to read cues because then you avoid awkwardness. So that was the fun
I
part about
agree.
that.
Avoiding awkwardness is very important. And I do have to preface, it's always a good idea to ask, do you want to kiss? Can I kiss you? Getting that consent is very important. But in my own personal life, I've noticed that I'm usually the person who asks if I can kiss first, and how the man might be able to learn my cues to suggest like, oh, I'm cueing that I'm ready. That could be very helpful for folks. Okay, so
Yeah.
second question, what do most people misunderstand, do you think, about authenticity?
Well, I think obviously, it's like the idea of authenticity is just like, oh, just be yourself, right? Like just be your untrammeled self and like warts and all. And that's basically what being authentic means, right? And, you know, we've gone back and forth in this debate for many years, but like authenticity isn't really about just like speaking every hot take that comes across your mind or like showing up in like sweatpants to a date just because you think that's most comfortable and that's most authentic to you. First of all, like humans, we're composed of multitudes, not to get too philosophical, but there's many parts to us, right? There's like the part that comes when you're interacting with your grandma. There's like the part that shows up when you're at work. And these are all you, like you're not faking any of them. It's just a matter of like, you imagine like which part you're dialing up and which aspect of yourself you're dialing down. And so I remember one of my students said something really wise. They were like, even the truth out of season is a lie. And what they were saying with that is that, if you misjudge the context or the environment and you think you're being authentic, but like that person doesn't know you yet, it just comes across as false to the other person and it makes them not trust you, right? Because you're overly unfiltered in a moment where they might expect you to be a little bit more sort of, keeping to yourself. So I think that's that part that we misunderstand about authenticity. It's not about, just being yourself and like not thinking at all about the context that you're in or who you're talking to. You can be authentic and still like choose to show certain parts of yourself at one time and then slowly reveal more of yourself as is appropriate to the relationship. So I think that's the biggest misconception. But on the flip side, and then there's some people who just like go into dating thinking of themselves as like a product, like, oh, I need to be chosen. And so I need to show up in
The
this like very
worst. Yeah.
particular way. Yeah. I need to make sure I'm saying the right things. I'm saying everything that they want to hear. I'm not like raising any red flags. And, I mean, you're not a product. You're not there to be chosen. Ultimately, the benefit is the relationship, and the relationship is an experience. It's not a transaction. So you do want to be kind of making sure that you are showing up as you and being, appreciated for who you really are. And it's going to be that somebody who sees you and who likes seeing you. And that's that feeling of love that's going to be soul fulfilling rather than soul crushing.
I think that's really interesting. The balance between understanding that showing up authentically doesn't mean like letting it all hang out and sharing all of your trauma and your previous life experiences. Like that doesn't necessarily make somebody authentic in the way that they come to a date or meet somebody for the first time. That you can kind of save those aspects of yourself to a certain extent. And on the flip side, thinking of yourself as like a whole person, that you bring something to the interaction with another person, and that you don't have to think about like, are they going to like me? Do I have to act a certain way? Because ultimately that's really anxiety producing. It takes away from the connection that you can have with somebody else. So I love that you mentioned that like being authentic means like thinking about present yourself in the best possible light, but also to remember that you're just a person, you're a human being in this experience, and you bring certain aspects and qualities, and the focus is really the interaction and not so much like, am I being judged favorably? So I love that. So another question I had, we mentioned the kissing study. Are there like, why do small cues like posture, eye contact, tone, why do those things do you think matter more than we realize?
They matter because, well, how do I put this? We don't control them as what much, so they end up being, in many ways, a more veridical or more honest signal of who we really are. So, to give you an example, we know, for example, that when people are struggling with depression, that it can actually change their posture and that the way they move and the way they present themselves. It can also be seen in like grooming and things like that. We can also see it in the tone of voice and things like that. So they might be saying like, I'm fine, everything's great, but you know that something's wrong, right? Like you can tell from all the nonverbals that something's up with this person. Um, so in essence, nonverbal communication really says a lot about somebody's personality. It can reveal a lot about their traits. It can reveal a lot about their mental state and physiological state. Like you can tell when somebody's nervous. I hope many people have not had this interaction, but you can tell when maybe somebody's like on drugs or affected by a substance. Like that can all be communicated via nonverbal communication. And then, of course, there's the dyadic part, the interactive part. Like, you know, we talk about like vibing with somebody or like, feeling like there's some sort of connection there. And that can even happen when there's not that much conversation happening. And it's like, what is that about? And it's like, well, there's the nonverbal communication that's taking place, what you're noticing about them, what they're noticing about you. And then this really interesting thing that happens when people start mirroring each other's nonverbal communication. And it can lead to a strong sense of like, oh, wow, I'm really like, vibing with this person. And yet, you may not even understand what's behind that. So yeah, nonverbal communication communicates a lot. Like I said, everything from how somebody sits to like the tone of voice that they use, the mood that they're in, everything is communicated via nonverbals. And we're not really aware of them. Like we're not always aware of the signals that we give off, and so we don't control them as much. So verbally, we control everything, right? People can tell us things that they think we want to hear. Non-verbally, because we're not as aware of it, we don't control it as much. And so it can end up being a very truthy kind of channel, right? Like a channel that really speaks a lot if we can learn to read it.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Like we don't control those nonverbal cues as easily as we control the words that we're saying to folks. And you mentioned mirroring, and it's something that I learned about recently. So now, whenever I go on a date, I'm like watching, how is this person behaving? Are they kind of are they like leaning in when I lean in, or are they leaning back when I lean back? And so that is all information and data that I can then use to determine, oh, like I think they do like me. So it can be very helpful, or they don't.
Absolutely, right on. I mean, and
Yeah.
everybody should be doing that. Like we need to start paying more attention to that aspect of it, because otherwise we'll miss it, right? And we'll miss so much about the connection that we have.
Yeah. And we're talking about these nonverbal cues, and it was mentioned briefly, but I really am curious about like the way our nervous systems show up and interact during conversation. And um, curious, what are the nonverbal signs maybe that someone's nervous system would be dysregulated on a date? Could you tell?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack, right, about nervous systems, right? So, like, where do we begin? um, so, the thing is that we do have physiological reactions to other people. And oftentimes these are occurring unconsciously. So we are not aware that we're having a physiological reaction to somebody. And then the question becomes like, what exactly are we reacting to? And that's where it can get kind of complicated because So Daniel Kahneman, for example, is a very famous psychologist, and he said he talked about like system one and system two processing. So that kind of like gut feeling that you have about certain people or maybe even certain situations, all that like gut intuitive stuff is system one. It's like us processing a situation or a person like that immediately. And what we're actually doing is like it's happening very fast, but it's quite sophisticated because we're kind of comparing what we're seeing now to all the stuff that we've learned in the past, including other patterns that we've noticed in our life. And we're just kind of doing this rapid pattern matching comparison, kind of drawing elements from the environment or that individual. And we're kind of going, ooh, this person, feels like off, right? Like we don't want to interact with this person. Or it can also happen that we're like, oh, wow, I really like this person. We have a lot of chemistry. So in essence, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but you might meet somebody and they can just feel like very familiar, right? The situation or the person can feel familiar in a good way, where you're like, oh, wow, it's like we're really on the same page. Or it can feel familiar in a bad way, like, oh, I've been here before. That red flag feeling that, something's off about this person. So that's all like system one processing. And right, it's cool and it's definitely an asset, but it's not always an asset. And so, for example, people who struggle like with anxiety, now it could be general anxiety, maybe it's dating anxiety, maybe it's social anxiety, all that sort of stuff. You might be getting a lot of gut feeling signals, but that's actually like your anxiety talking, right? You don't, system one processing is not as useful when you don't have a lot of experience in a particular domain. So,
That sounds like a potential pitfall to fall in when you're engaging in dating to like figure out like is the anxiety that I'm feeling just related to me, or is it because I'm feeding off of the energy of this other person? I can
exactly.
see how that can get tricky.
It does. And, a lot of people, and this is a fundamental question that people have about gut feelings in general. Like, is this wisdom, embodied wisdom that I'm feeling, right? Like a gut feeling, like I need to get away from this person? Or is this an anxious response to a situation that feels unfamiliar to me, or maybe feels familiar because I've picked out a few elements that remind me of something, and now my like anxiety trigger is through the roof, and I feel like I need to like pull the cord, right? Pull the plug and get out of here. And so, how do we know when it's one or the other? And
Yes.
that's the problem. Like, you need, if you're somebody that has a lot of experience with people, a lot of experience dating, maybe if you work, if your everyday work life is just surrounded by people and you've met a lot of people and you have that experience, your intuition is probably better than somebody who doesn't have that, right? Who is like mostly alone and is just starting out dating and doesn't quite like know people, right? So it's not, the less experience that you have or the less social your life is, the less likely it is that your intuition is going to be like right on. It doesn't mean it's going to be wrong, but like you need to be aware of that. And that's another reason why people should date and should date frequently, and just so you can get exposed to people and you can start learning good patterns, good data. But the other thing that I've heard a psychologist talk about like understanding the difference between like wisdom, intuition versus anxiety. And she said that one of the best ways that you can tell a difference is about how urgent it feels. So like the greater the sense of urgency it is, like, oh my God, I need to leave right now, the more
Mhm.
likely it is that it's kind of could be some sort of panic reaction or an anxious reaction. I'm not qualified. I'm not that kind of doctor. But it is interesting, like, to note that embodied wisdom can kind of emerge. Like it's something that you have maybe you're coming home at the end of the date and you're like, something was off there, versus something that they might say in the middle of the date that like triggers and panics you and you feel like you have to exit straight away. But again, there are of course, situations where you should be leaving absolutely, but it was just one helpful way to kind of know the difference. But ultimately,
Yeah.
yeah, experience with people is what teaches you how to be a really good pattern recognizer.
And that made me think of two things. Like first, the challenges that people face when it comes to remote work, for example. Like remote work is awesome. I love working remotely.
Same.
However, when it comes to dating, you're very much at a disadvantage because you don't have that dial into your intuition because you're just not interacting with people physically enough to get that practice. And so that's why I think it's so important to really put yourself in positions where you can interact with folks. And so that's why I started those Storyfull socials where people get together and have conversations and interact. Because I think we just need more of those experiences. And then the second thing that I thought of when you brought up the urgent anxiousness and also the feelings of anxiousness that happen maybe after the fact, that made me think of why it's so important when we're dating people to date slow, because it you need that time after interacting with somebody to really digest and process how you felt when you were with that person, and that just you need to think about it. You need to like feel it in your body, and you can't necessarily process that immediately. And that's why it really is helpful to parse out the time that you're spending with individuals over lengthier amounts of time to really determine whether or not you feel good, you feel calm when you're with this person, not just that one time, but over multiple incidences and experiences. So I love that you mentioned that. I want to talk about authenticity and how that shows up in the body, not just psychologically.
Yeah, I mean, so like let's talk like authenticity versus deception, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, the way authenticity shows up is exactly the opposite to how deception shows up. And it's not in ways you might expect. There is no Pinocchio's nose, by the way, that tells you when somebody's lying. I've done this research myself. There's been thousands of data points collected on this. We've done the data looking at like, do people's nonverbals change? Like, is there something happen when they're lying that we can tell that they're lying? But here's the one thing that does seem to shake out when it comes to deception, and that's the idea of consistency, right? So consistency between like what they're saying and how they're saying it. Consistency between like what they're saying and like what they're doing, and then consistency over time as well. So if you see somebody, like if you're on a date and you ask a question, I don't know, maybe you're curious about previous dating experiences or something like that. And if you notice that person's tone shift markedly, it might be an indicator that something's going on, like they're thinking really hard or they're uncomfortable or they might not be as forthcoming. And then authenticity is like the complete flip side of that. It's that consistency. And that's that signal that we get from people, right? Like they're talking about something that makes them happy and they have a true like expression of joy on their face. That's a trust signal. That's an authenticity signal. Or they tell us that they're really interested in us and, then they take the initiative to text and organize dates and things like that, right? Like that's matching, the behavior is matching the expressed feeling. And so consistency is really that key. Anyone that's being inconsistent, that makes them not trust, that makes us not trust that person, right? Because we don't know which channel to tune into. We don't know what we should be paying attention to. So yeah, in terms of deception, even professional like lie detectors, when they're looking at how to tell when somebody's lying, they look at change and they look at inconsistency. And by the way, they don't use it to make like a snap judgment, oh, that person's a liar. No, they just, when they notice that inconsistency, like somebody saying they're really sad about something, but they don't seem to have a very sad expression on their face, they use it to ask more questions and to kind of get curious about that. And so that's kind of that fundamental difference between, being deceptive versus being authentic. And I think sometimes we can also come across as inauthentic accidentally. And that's when we don't have our own crap figured out, right? Like we say we want a long-term relationship, but we behave like we have no idea what we want. right? So that inauthenticity can also happen accidentally when we haven't figured it out for ourselves and when we don't even know who we are. So we're sending mixed messages constantly to people. So yeah, I think that's how we characterize it broadly, at least.
I love that. So consistency and learning whether or not an individual is presenting themselves in a consistent way. I think I struggled with that. It's like, what does that mean, that consistency? Like, are they touching their nose every time they lie? But that's not what you're talking about. And you mentioned this, which really helped me understand, is if somebody is saying, for example, like you mentioned, that they're sad and they're not, they don't look sad, that is an example of inconsistency. And then just thinking back to other people that I dated, individuals who said, like, I want a long-term relationship, I'm ready for a long-term relationship, and then come to find out that they just stopped texting me. That suggests that maybe that person, well, for lots of reasons, but I think that that is a sign that they're not showing me consistency, and that would be reason enough not to continue to pursue. So, more reason why dating slow is so encouraged, because you need that data in order to determine your the analysis that you need to make decisions.
And I think I have to say, I think people overweight verbal communication in dating. They look at somebody's profile and it says like, oh, interested in long term, blah, blah, blah. And we pay too much attention to what people say on a date. And I just feel like dating is like too verbal, right? I'm like, no. And actually, the ideal date is to go construct a piece of IKEA furniture with somebody, and that will tell you like everything that you need to know about your compatibility, right? Like, which is why I'm a big advocate of activity dating, like engaging in some sort of activity together where you're not just verbally exchanging constantly. Because again, I'm not saying that people are actively lying. I'm just saying that sometimes we don't know who we are and what we want. And so we end up falling into like just saying the right thing. And then leaving the other person confused when, we pull back or we actually feel like this is going too quickly and, we start to ghost somebody, right? So we're overweighting verbal communication in dating. I really think that.
Yeah, I had to learn that the hard way. As a lot of people have, right? But
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I think when you take a step back and decide, like, I'm just gonna like see this person a couple times a week maximum, and then have just 2 hour maximum time spent with this individual, then I have enough to digest and reflect, and then see, can we continue to meet up with each other and enjoy each other, learn about each other in those smaller doses. I think that's just so much better than, somebody who is a little bit impulsive and enjoys the excitement of that early connection. Those types of exciting connections do tend to burn quickly, because they just don't have the sustainability. They don't have, like, it's much easier to be inconsistent. And then people lose heart or whatever. And yeah, so I like
And
to, yeah, go
I'd
ahead.
love to kind of add something to that as well, which is, like how people are like, oh, I need chemistry. Like I need it to be like really, exciting when I meet somebody.
Yes.
And the other thing that we tend to do is like we tend to overinterpret chemistry as like some sign of like compatibility, like for the long term, and it has nothing to do with it. It could be that you're kind of like vibing and you're each kind of recognizing each other sort of from the patterned way that you've lived your life. But the other thing that can happen is some people are actually genuinely charismatic and charming. They have learned how to like talk to people and make the conversation electrifying. But we should be careful before we interpret that as like a sign that it's like about us, that the chemistry is there because like we're a part of it, right? Sometimes it's just that person's really good at it. And I'll tell you famously, like con artists are very good at chemistry, and honestly, even serial killers are good at chemistry, right? Like it's not, you need to be careful not to place too much weight on the excitement and the chemistry that you might be feeling with an individual. It doesn't always mean that they're a good person, and it doesn't always mean that you guys are compatible. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to add to what you were saying
Thank
because I think
you.
it's really
Good,
important. Like go
good
slow.
reminder. Good reminders. And that kind of leads me to, think about with practical tools, right, for better conversations. Do you think there are small shifts that someone can do to help them feel more comfortable, grounded, and connected in
Um,
conversation?
Sure. And sure. And honestly, this is the same thing that I teach to like my public speaking students. So it's like, you might think like, what does public speaking have to do with dating? Well, it turns out a lot. And the thing that they have in common is if you want to be a good dater or a good public speaker, you have to think about connection, connecting with your audience if you're speaking publicly and connecting with the other person if you're dating. And that connection is going to come from one very important shift that you make. And that is moving away from the performance mindset, right? What you don't want to be doing is going in thinking, I hope I make a good impression. I hope that this is a good dating performance. I hope I perform myself well in a way that's like attractive and it's appealing. Because the more you're thinking about yourself and how you come across and what you need to say, the less you're thinking about the other person. And that's going to kind of both, it has two negative effects. Unfortunately, increases your anxiety. And then the other thing, it makes you less likable because you're kind of focused on yourself and nobody likes that. So if you really want to make a subtle shift when it comes to approaching any date, any situation like that, do this. Imagine that you're on a mission to discover what is unique and fascinating about the person that you're about to date. Okay, you're on a mission. You're going to find a way to illuminate the light of their being, right? I'm quoting here. I think either James Baldwin or somebody, but like the idea that you're there to kind of illuminate somebody's or light, right? And so that subtle shift you could make, like from how can I discover what is interesting about this person rather than how can I make sure they think I'm interesting. That's that subtle shift. And honestly, this works for any conversation. It doesn't have to be dating specific. Like any conversation you're go into it with a focus on who you're talking to rather than thinking about yourself. That's my like number one tip.
I love that. And as a former educator, right, I love the idea that you really can learn something from anybody that you speak with. So going into it with like an explorer mindset, what kind of gem am I going to uncover from this conversation today? I think that's fantastic.
You kind of
Um,
have to fundamentally believe, you kind of have to believe that people are interesting as you are interesting. There's something fascinating about you, and there's some fascinating things about other people. What's that saying? Like only boring people get bored. That's the point, right? Like we can all be interested and fascinated by other people, but you have to believe that people are interesting.
I love that. And I want to also address something that you said earlier. We were talking about authenticity and how can you express your authenticity. And it's one thing that you mentioned that I really appreciated is by showing your own enthusiasm for a particular subject and finding things that you're passionate about. That passion and that excitement that gets translated across to the other person so that they can see you as somebody who is this authentic person who has this particular passion about whatever. In my case, it could be about dogs or plants or art. Or better conversations and having conversations about dating. So I think that is another tip that we can provide for folks is find things that you're really passionate about that you can talk about with somebody else as a way to communicate your authenticity better.
And I
Yeah.
don't know if you ever like advocate for this, but like dating yourself as well, like is really important in terms of understanding your own passions and what you're interested in. I know sometimes, like I've definitely met people in midlife who are like, I don't know what I'm interested in. I don't know what I'm passionate about. I've been in this role for so long, mother, whatever, that like I've lost all sense of who I am and what interests me. And dating is like the only thing that they do like outside of, you know in their free time. And I'm like, well, it's about also like taking yourself on a date and discovering what you like to do, because only in cultivating that sense of self can you show it to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important to be self-aware, to know yourself. And if you don't know yourself, then then I strongly encourage folks to, like you said, date yourself and find out what are your passions, what do you enjoy doing, and then do them so that you have something to talk about. Right? Well, this conversation is such a reminder that connection isn't just about what we say, it's about the way that we show up. It's those micro moments, it's those quiet cues, it's the ways that our nervous systems respond to each other, and they all shape whether we feel safe, curious, or closed off. Elena, I want to thank you so much for bringing so much clarity and heart to this conversation, and to everybody listening. Notice what your body tells you in your next conversation. Notice when you feel yourself soften or when someone feels genuinely authentic. Can you tell based on, what they're sharing with you verbally and non-verbally? Those moments really do matter. Your adventure in love and life continues. Until next time, let's keep telling a better story.
Awesome. Thank you.